Hi, I spend a lot of time with young people also, and I have an observation about them and then a question for you. And that is that the younger generation is extremely pro-life. It's the most pro-life age group. The younger you get, the more pro-life people are.
Interesting.
What is your theory, number one, about why that's so, and number two, about why we don't, why we're not capitalizing on that properly?
You know, I really don't know anything about this, but that's not going to stop me from giving you a good answer. Can I get another water? Oh, here's one. Great, perfect. First of all, I think part of it is, excuse me. Part of it is just, as I mentioned earlier, is a tool and a weapon we should be using. And that is just young people's natural rebellion to what is their parents' belief, just naturally. So just start with that idea that people always rebel against the orthodoxy. Young people rebel against whatever the orthodoxy is. I think, if I were to speculate, I think that young people have discovered, you know what else I find about this really young generation? It's going to come as a surprise to a lot of you people. I think they're actually probably the most virtuous generation we've ever produced. They genuinely don't want to hurt people. They genuinely want to be good. They want to be good in a way that I certainly didn't want to be good when I was their age. You know? Now, a lot of that has been indoctrination into socialist good, like I want to be good, I want to protect the planet Earth, I want to be good, and I want to vote for abortion rights, I want to be good, and do those other things. But their drive is they want to be good people, and they want to do the right thing. And I think probably what's different now between what the case was in the 70s with Roe versus Wade, I think is two things. First of all, I think medical technology has improved quite a bit. And through things like ultrasound and through things like progressively earlier surviving premature babies, they're beginning to see, in many cases they know, kids who were fetuses, basically were born as, you know, fetuses. Really, some cases, shockingly early survival rates for that. I think that connects to people. I think the image of ultrasound is a really powerful thing for the pro-life movement, the idea that you can see hands and fingers, which you couldn't see back when this whole debate started. And I also think to some level, and I'll be generous here, I think a lot of it is due to the over-ripening of the feminist movement. When the feminist movement started, it's like the EPA. When the EPA started, in Cleveland, the Ohio River caught fire. I mean, it caught fire. And I remember, and I'm sure you remember too, back in the 1970s, you would sit in a traffic jam and every single car had little blue puffs of smoke coming out. And when jets would take off out of the airport, they'd be like somebody smudged a pencil eraser, just black lines of smoke. And there was garbage on the freeways everywhere. And you just throw a bag of garbage out the window, and the Great Lakes were dead. They were just simply dead. They were pools of poison. So the EPA comes along and they start doing genuine good. They start cleaning up the environment. They start cleaning up the Lake Erie is full of fish now, and the Ohio River doesn't catch fire anymore, and the highways are cleaner and all this other stuff. But like any other agency or like any other philosophy, once it's reached its peak goal, it doesn't just go away. It just exponentially tries to stay relevant by getting into dicier and dicier and smaller and smaller and smaller, little sillier and sillier arguments. So now we're going to basically kill the breadbasket of the world, which is the Central California Valley, to protect a fish called the Delta smelt, which really is indistinguishable from the sardines that come on your pizza. You know, so that's the phenomenon. But I think it applies to feminism as well. When you're originally talking about open workplace harassment, and when you're talking about open discrimination in terms of paying people less for a job, we'll get into this whole thing about, you know, the income equality between men and women is largely due to the fact that men do more dangerous jobs and they do them for longer hours. That's really what's responsible there. But when you're talking about fundamental human access and human rights for feminism, I'm a feminist to that degree. But once again, what you found is that this argument gets shriller and shriller and shriller, and they turn the volume up louder and louder and louder to get progressively less and less and less of a gain. And I think young people have had enough of this. I think they look at these people as just a bunch of, you know, kind of crazed, you know, really unhappy people. I don't really know if there's any larger cultural forces at work, other than to say that maybe it's due to the fact that there are just so much fewer children now than there were. I mean, I'm from a family of 4 kids. My dad's family had 7 kids, and my grandfather had 10 kids. Now, you're lucky if you find 1 or 2. You don't see a lot of kids anymore. I'm just speculating off the top of my head, but I actually really begin to wonder if it doesn't have something to do with that. But, you know, I think the argument when we talk about abortion, there's so much of the left prides itself on science. Science, for the left, has become a philosophy. It's become a religion. But science, look, I've been a scientist. I've been a professional scientist. I taught astronomy, and I worked in a geochronology lab. I've been a paid professional scientist. Not a degreed one, but I've done science for a living. Science is not a philosophy. Science is not a religion. Science is a tool. Science is a tool that's like a scalpel. It does a specific job. It can interrogate nature, get some answers, and so on. Science is not a philosophy. But if you want to talk about the abortion issue in terms of science, then you really have two events. You have conception and you have birth. And everything between those two events is just an opinion. There's absolutely nothing between day 37 and day 38 that's any different. Nothing happens. There's no milestones. There's no other milestones. Conception and birth. That's it. So if I were going to make the case for the pro-life argument, I would say, if you're saying that this is not a person up until the time they're born, then do you have the right to kill that baby 20 minutes before it's born? There's not one person in 30 would agree with that. You'd have to be a hardcore ideologue to say that, yeah, 10 minutes before the baby's due to be born, we're going to go in there and chop it up, and that's not killing a person. Alternatively, you could also say, well, if it's not a person 1 minute before it's born, is it a person 1 minute after it's born? What changed? What changed to the organism, to the individual person? What changed? The baby didn't change. His location changed, but the baby didn't change. So if it's not okay to kill him a minute after he's born, why is it okay to kill him a minute before he's born? And then you get into the science of it. The science is it's either conception or birth. So if it's not a person until it's born, but 1 minute after it's born it's suddenly a person, what's different about that baby? Its location is different. And it's not your body. It doesn't have your DNA. It's not you. You're part of it, you're half of it, but it's not you. That's how I'd make the argument. And look, I think, just to say this, I think this argument needs to happen personally. I don't think it's the federal government's job to make these kind of moral arguments, either way, in our favor or on their favor. Okay?
I have a question about the Liberty Amendments. A talk show host has written a book about the Liberty Amendments, and I have heard different opinions on that, and about having a constitutional convention, who should attend, how do you limit what they're going to say that would be more pro-constitution than non-constitution, and I'd like to have your opinion of that.
You've obviously been listening to that right-wing lunatic Mark Levin. That crazed, knuckle-dragging Neanderthal idiot. You know, I will answer your question, but before I do, doesn't it strike you, it certainly strikes me, that the people on our team who are making the arguments have, I'll just take a shot in the dark, 60 IQ points over the people on the left who are making the arguments? 60? When you get into guys like Thomas Sowell and Mark Levin and Victor Davis Hanson and you know, all of these guys, all of them, you're dealing with people who are dealing with philosophy. And when you get into the champions of the left, you guys like Bill Maher and you guys like Jon Stewart and Janine Garofalo, and they're issuing snark. Snark is the cynical dismissal of reason. Our team has got 50 points of IQ on their team. And so if Mark Levin says we need a constitutional convention, that's good enough for me. But here's the thing. My concern, as you know, the Constitution says that the Constitution can be amended through ratification by the states, which is how they've all been done, or a new constitutional convention could be called. And so the question is, do we regain the Constitution by starting another constitutional convention? My first response to this whole thing would be, you know, if you just followed the Constitution, we wouldn't have any troubles at all. Really, if we followed the Constitution, we wouldn't have this NSA spying, we wouldn't have any of this other stuff. But there are amendments like the 16th Amendment, the Income Tax Amendment, and the 17th Amendment, and so on that seem to be causing us a lot of harm. I don't really know the answer to this, but I would say this. My concern is that if we were to hold a constitutional convention, it would be gamed by the left. They're masters at this, absolute masters at this. when they do a Google search for Rick Santorum, some other thing comes up because they managed to get, 10 million people without jobs to link it to some other thing, and so they game the system. And I'm extremely worried about that. Now, I haven't read Mark Levin's book. I read his last two. But I'm sure he's got some safeguards in place about this. Now, the counter-argument would be, maybe we ought to have this Constitutional Convention before it's too late, right? Before it's too late, before these ideas completely die out of the culture. So I think if there were reasonable safeguards against it being gamed, I think I might be in favor of it. We need something. We need to repeal the 17th Amendment. I wouldn't mind repealing the 16th Amendment and going to a flat tax. It'd be kind of nice, too. Anybody else? Sure.
I just want to make a comment. When I was being raised in the 50s, my father told us that all of this would be happening, and how they were going to do this to our country was through three things: the media, education, and entertainment. When you see the way our children and our people dress today, is because they go to the movies. And I want to thank you for giving us the responses that we need to liberals when we are confronted, because they're growing every day, and we need to grow with good responses, patriotism, and I thank you so much.
Well, you're very welcome, and thank you it's very kind of you. Let me just give you one more little glimmer of hope, because God knows we could use some hope in these dark days. The reason Barack Obama is in trouble now, relative trouble, is because ultimately, no matter how good you are with spin and no matter how much air cover you have with the media, ultimately progressive ideas have to come into contact with reality. And the reason Barack Obama's poll numbers are now in the 30s is because no matter what the New York Times and MSNBC and CNN and all those other guys wanted to say, they could not put themselves between an American citizen's eyeballs and the back of an insurance check that says your policy has been canceled. They simply couldn't spin that. You can't spin it. Another example that is one of my personal favorites is Barack Obama constantly talks about how he has NBA-level playing skills and he's got the same game as LeBron James, and there's video footage of him shooting free throws, and I think he got 3 out of 22 or something. See, you can't spin gravity either, unfortunately. So the good news here in the media is simply this. No matter how hard they try to push their indoctrination on us, even guys like Matt Damon is a movie star. Matt Damon is a movie star today because virtually every movie that Matt Damon is in, he is running around shooting a gun. He is not combating the forces of evil with a sternly worded letter from the United Nations. He's shooting a gun. And heroism, personal heroism, you can't tell a movie, you can't tell a story. I'm telling you, you cannot tell a story about the heroism of an organization. It always has to be about people, or else people can't connect to the story. So that really means it's about individuals. It's about individual people. That's our entire theory of government. And the final thing I'll say about how liberal media ends up shooting itself in the foot is one that's really, really interesting to me. And there's several examples, but I'll give you just 2 or 3 real fast. When Norman Lear made All in the Family had an enormous impact on this country. And back then, I think many of the points All in the Family needed to make actually needed to be made. But what's interesting about All in the Family is Norman Lear, who's an arch-liberal, wrote Archie Bunker to be a laughingstock that the entire country would simply mock and despise. And he became the most beloved character of the 1970s and into the 1980s. And you know why that is? Because every time that Mike Stivic spoke, that was Norman Lear and every single one of the writers speaking. And every time Archie Bunker said something stupid or racist, that was the same writers saying, we don't like this. But the one thing they could never get past was, Mike Stivic gets to be a liberal D-bag because Archie Bunker gets up every day and goes to work on the loading docks. And you could never get past that fundamental structure of the fact that Mike Stivic, for all of his moral and intellectual superiority, is dependent upon Archie Bunker's hard work. And they never once said that, but every single episode you knew it was true. He gets to be this moralizing, superior creep because he's living for free in this so-called Neanderthal's house while he goes out and works for a living. That's reality. I'll give you another example. In Boston Legal, they made Denny Crane, Bill Shatner character, they made him into an arch-conservative. And he was going to be the laughingstock. So he pulls out, "Are you armed?" They did a little commercial for him. "Are you armed?" He pulls out like 65 different weapons. But everybody identified with him. He became the most popular character on the thing because he was a man, because he was direct, because he wasn't whiny crybaby, because he said he wanted what he wanted. Parks and Recreation. Ron Swanson, the big conservative. He hates government. He hates government. He says, walks into a restaurant and he says, "I want you to give me all of the bacon you have. I know you think you heard me say I want a lot of bacon, but I want all of the bacon you have." He's an arch conservative. He's the best thing on the show. Alec Baldwin, the arch liberal, was the conservative character on 30 Rock, and he was the most beloved character on the show. So they actually make conservatives to mock, and they end up being the only reason the show is there. They end up being the people that people identify with. And you can even go further with this to say that if you look at even like anti-heroes, my favorite show I think of all time is Deadwood, which is the most profane show ever recorded. It's just nothing but curse words, nothing but. But the lead character was designed to be a villain, an Al Swearingen, but you sympathize with him and identify with him because he's a man, because he takes action, because he doesn't put up with any crap. Tony Soprano is a mob murderer. People identify with him because Tony Soprano takes care of his family. And there's a scene, a really classic scene in The Sopranos, where, if you don't know The Sopranos, Tony Soprano is a mob gangster in New Jersey who's in constant therapy with a psychiatrist because he's having horrible dreams and he's becoming completely dysfunctional. And in one of the seasons, he has a romantic attachment to the psychiatrist. But in one of these seasons, this psychiatrist is raped in a parking lot stairwell. And she goes to her fellow psychiatrist, played by Peter Bogdanovich, another liberal intellectual. And he says, "Well, you know, I know it's going to be hard for you to process, and I know it's going to be this and this and this." And you see her thinking about telling Tony Soprano because she knows the instant that she tells Tony Soprano, he's going to have that guy killed. He's going to have that guy killed within 3 hours. And everybody identifies with that primal sense of masculinity and perfection that Tony Soprano represents, as opposed to this liberal, idealized, well, probably better that you got raped than that everybody should carry a gun kind of thing. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. They can't deny it. And the thing that's so amazing to me is even these liberal writers can't stop writing it because it's just true. Thanks again for having me, guys.